you. My name is Victoria Birch. I am a Technology and Innovation Partner at Norton Fulbright in our London office. So that is an excellent point, and it really gets to the heart of how you go about structuring things like ICOs and tokens and cryptocurrencies. Because what a lot of people get wrong is that they think if we incorporate in places like Gibraltar or Singapore or the UK, that is the only legislation that you have to think about. And so you do have to take that cross-border look across the whole sweep of where your investors are likely to come from. Now, when we start with a project, we usually go in with three key questions at the start. Do you want to have there are three approaches you can take. You can either look at it and say these are unregulated and they don't fit within the regulations, and so we're just going to go ahead. And if you say that, we tell you goodbye, good luck. Or at the other extreme, you can say, well, this is a full-blown securities offering, so I'm going to follow the securities law implications, which, you know, is fantastic and will cost you a lot of money and may or may not be appropriate for your particular project. Well, there's a sort of second limb that a lot of people go for, which is you take a risk-based approach and you say, our investors are likely to come from certain key jurisdictions, usually where there's a heavy concentration of crypto-style investors. And we will look at the securities laws in those jurisdictions and do the analysis there. And for the rest, we will take it on risk. And that is an approach that a lot of people do take. And the reason that I think that is so, although there is a lot of discrepancies between different definitions and the way people approach crypto assets, there's also a lot of synergies. So a lot of legal systems are taking one approach, and so what works in one jurisdiction may well work in others. And so if you go for that sort of risk-based approach, in general, you may well end up capturing them all. It's not without its risks, but that is certainly something that people have been trying. There are certain types of, if we call them assets, under UK law that have not protected status, but almost have a sort of higher threshold when it comes to legal formalities and the regulation. And it's interesting because you can have things like real estate, which aren't necessarily have as higher regulated threshold as, say, interests in equities. But at the same time, when it comes to legal formalities, things like transferring land obviously follows a much more prescribed process. So you almost have to look at what is the actual asset that you're looking to tokenize, and how would your starting point would be, would you actually transfer it if it was the actual asset itself. So if you were going to transfer the land, how would you go about transferring it? But when you've got a token, you're going that few more steps higher up the chain. And so it may be that the restrictions that apply for a direct transfer don't apply when you've tokenized it. And so that's the kind of analysis you have to do. Look at how you would actually go about transferring it if it was the actual asset. So we've worked on a couple of projects in the gold space where we've done exactly that. There are particular regulations for how you transfer gold. But if you're tokenizing an interest, you're not actually moving gold from warehouse to warehouse. Do those regulations apply? One of the issues that you raised earlier about definitions and how they fit into the whole regulatory landscape. What is interesting in the UK is the regulators don't use the terms securities tokens and utility tokens. Instead, the analysis that you tend to do tends to be along the lines of, is it a collective investment scheme? Which of the various regulated categories does it fall within? So it's almost as if it's not the asset asset itself, it's about what activity are you looking to do with it, what process are you looking to go through, and by doing that, do you fall within the regulations? And that's why this whole area can seem like a bit of a regulatory minefield, but to be honest, we have done so many of these now that I think what probably 18 months ago was a very difficult analysis has become steadily easier. So this is an interesting phenomenon, because in a way what's been happening over the last 12 months is the market has been maturing. So the world of tokens has been maturing, but whereas previously there was a lot of sort of standardized documentation, so people looking at things like SAFT or SOFT, depending on how you like to pronounce it. There has, in recent months, been a little bit of a backlash with people moving away from that sort of very standardized documentation for token offerings and have been moving into much more bespoke documentation. But when it comes to things like your own offering, where you're looking to potentially have tokens in different asset pools, there is no reason why you couldn't have some degree of standardized documentation. Presumably, though, the rights, it depends how standardized the rights are that you would want them to have in the underlying technology platform. I don't think we're there yet, and I think one of the reasons we're not is exactly what we were talking about before in terms of how the regulations work. One of the approaches that people take, particularly for jurisdictions that are particularly difficult, so places like the US, see some of the Asian jurisdictions are particularly prescriptive about people using a token format, is you have to take a much more stringent approach to stopping those investors from, or potential investors from actually investing in the platform. And that will change over time. So I don't think we're really at a state yet where it's going to be a punch in your numbers and you're good to go. But certainly that was the idea behind the SAFs, that people wanted to have a very short form document that then they could use in their token sales. What is interesting though is as the projects have got much more serious and much more mature, and people have moved away from that. They don't seem to want that anymore. But that certainly was where it looked like it was going a few months ago. So that is certainly true of a lot of the regulators are very much taking it. We're going to see what happens. Generally what happens is when something goes wrong and people start to lose their money, that's when they start to get involved. I think there is a friction between the sort of competing roles of regulators. So often most of them have a mandate that they want to try and encourage competition, they want to try and encourage innovation. But at the same time, they have their other remit, which is consumer protection. And with something like the token sales, which although it is becoming a much more mature market, we're seeing a lot of very established, even some of the most established companies and corporations in the world are looking at this model. So we're not talking about small fish anymore. But previously it did generate a lot of negative press. There were a lot of token sales that made a lot of money that probably didn't have the legitimacy of what we're seeing today. So I think that didn't really help its case with the regulators. But then equally there are a number of regulators who are very proactive and are actively looking to encourage people to come to their jurisdiction, to set up, to issue from there. What I've been amazed at is how many countries are here with with their regulatory framework. We want to encourage people. We've set out a whole definition trail for how crypto assets are defined, and they're really making a play for this space. And also, although they haven't made any specific pronouncements, although there is one that has just been made. The UK is obviously fairly welcoming in this space too. But it's interesting that some of them are still taking that step back, and it probably is because they want to see how it's going to play out. We still have the legacy of quite a few of the sort of bad actors or potential bad actors, and they want to. It may well be that it's the industry itself that cleans itself out as it becomes more mature and as more of these sort of players who are much more about compliance and much more about making sure that it's regulated, less of the, oh, we're just going to take the view it's not regulated. As things become much more legitimate, then the regulators probably will get involved. So I quite like working with, I think most of them are exciting. There are a couple where you feel like you're really making a difference, which as a lawyer is an interesting experience. You don't often get to feel like you're changing the world. One of the things that I love most about this is when you're looking at things that are things like smart contracts, things that involve actually going back to the basics of law to work out how it fits within the sort of legal system, and it gets to be quite intricate in the way that you things. To give you a silly example, when we look at things like AI and how who's liable if there's an unintended consequence or something happens that's unexpected, some of the case law we're looking at, because under English law it's very case law driven, has been old Victorian case law about horses going mad and kicking people and causing loss, and where no person is liable. Is that the same as an AI function? So it's sort of using weird examples to try and find a way to fit the technology into the legal system. But I do also like working with the FinTech startups, and I think part of it is because you want to get them to where they want to be as quickly as possible, and also a lot of what we do often seems alien and maybe new to people, and so it's that whole feeling of helping people get started on a road where hopefully they're going to end up doing something incredible. So that is also a personal love of mine.